Hello, greeting from APO, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to APO Productivity Talk. My name is Junho Kim from APO, ASEAN Productivity Organization. Today, we would like to talk on how to innovate service sector to improve service sector productivity. Today's keyword is productivity, service sector, and innovation. For this topic, we invited expert, Dr. Carlo Bellini. Dr. Carlo Bellini is an expert in strategy, innovation, and service sector. He is the medical doctor, consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, and AI business strategist. Now, he is the founder and CEO of Health Innovation Performance Consulting, based in Australia. Good afternoon, Dr. Carlo.
Hello, Junho. It is such a pleasure to be with you, the Asian Productivity Organization, and all of our audience today.
Thank you for joining APO Talk. This is an interactive session, and many viewers are connected from all over the world. Please say hello to all participants.
It's wonderful to be with all of you, no matter where you are joining us. I'm currently based in Perth, in Australia, but we have our friends nearby in all of Asia, Europe, America, Africa. It's just a real pleasure wherever you are to have you join, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carlo. To start our session, I would like to raise three key issues. First, how COVID-19 has accelerated Industry 4.0 and disruption in the service sector. Second, how service sector organizations can respond to COVID-19. Finally, third one is how we can approach innovation to increase productivity in the service sector. For these three main issues, I'd like to ask Dr. Carlo to share his insight. Dr. Carlo, please.
Thank you very much, Junho. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you, as I said. And as Junho introduced, today we'll be looking at productivity and innovation in the post-COVID-19 service sector. So let's kick off and dive straight in. We're going to organize our discussion in the following way. We're first going to discuss disruption and the disruption that COVID-19 has enacted on the service sector. We're then going to look at Industry 4.0. What is Industry 4.0 and how has COVID accelerated it? Furthermore, we're then going to dive into the service sector and look at productivity improvements through innovation and what organizations can do. So let's first look at disruption and dive in and question what happened in a pre-COVID world. So the first part that I want to suggest to all of you is that as humans, we generally find that the world moves in a linear fashion. We believe that the world moves in a linear progress where we extrapolate what happened in the past and we extrapolate this to the future. We can see this here in the following graph, where we have this growth, where things seem relatively predictable and dependable. However, the world actually doesn't happen like that. And it's the deception of exponential growth that we actually feel. Now, the reason for this is in the early parts of this curve, you'll see that linear growth and exponential growth actually mirror each other. However, you get this exponential trajectory that arises out of the linear one, and you get significant disruption. And in COVID, when we look at where we were before COVID, we were at that inflection point. We were at a point where life was moving. We felt that things were relatively predictable. It was going okay, but we were actually at that inflection point. So when we look at this situation, we can ask the question, what was the trend and where were we trending pre-COVID? With that, we see the following. We started off as humans in civilization as cavemen and cave women, living with rudimentary tools just a couple thousand years ago. And then when we look at where we've grown as a civilization in a relatively short period of time, in an evolutionary sense, we have significantly moved to a period where we've got this. And current day, we've got these humanoid robots that are moving in a way that we could never have imagined decades ago. You can see here this human movement moving from right to left, from right to left. It is so lifelike and real. And there is one reason that we have achieved this in such a fast period of time, and that is exponential technological transformation. See, the world doesn't actually progress in a linear way. It progresses in an exponential trajectory. And we have all witnessed exponential technological transformation. The obvious example that I just gave then of moving from cavemen and women to now a mechanized robot that's able to mimic human movement so precisely and in a sophisticated way that the mind boggles when we think about it decades ago. But we experience it in day-to-day ways as well. Mobile telephones is one of the most obvious examples, where decades ago, a mobile telephone was so large, you couldn't actually carry it around conveniently. It was originally thought that mobile telephones would be linked to cars because they're so large and they're not really mobile at all. And then we look at where we've ended now in a relatively short period of time, where mobile telephones are affordable, ubiquitous across the world, and people in developing countries are able to access the information of a mobile telephone of which the President of the United States was able to access 20 years ago. Things have shifted significantly. And when we look at that, and we look at this shift, we see the following. We see this movement and change of different types of industries. We started at Industry 1.0, mechanization and steam power, weaving loom, Industry 2.0, mass production, Industry 3.0, automation, computers and electronics, and we've now entered Industry 4.0, cyberphysical systems, Internet of Things, and networks. Industry 4.0 is here. It's been here for some time and it is accelerating on an exponential trajectory. The industries that it's most affecting are as follows: artificial intelligence, robotics, biotech, nanotech, medicine, neuroscience, energy, computing. These are all accelerating technologies that are part of Industry 4.0, and we are seeing significant disruption in these industries. So what happens in this scenario when you have a pandemic? When you have COVID hit, you get the following scenario, and that is COVID moved us up the disruption curve. COVID significantly accelerated and moved us up the disruption curve. In a short period of time, the world has been disrupted further than we could have ever predicted, and by something that was a black swan event that no one saw coming. So you end up in the following scenario, where you think your life is relatively predictable, but over time you get this significant exponential growth surprise factor, and where you think you'll end up and where you actually end up in the future are vastly different places. And that's where we're at with COVID. COVID has come and it has intersected with the already exponential technological trend of Industry 4.0 that we were on, and we've seen significant disruption. In this disruption, some people are significant winners and some people are significant losers. And I want to now explore what these Industry 4.0 trends are in more detail to reveal the different trends that we're seeing and which organizations, which groups are benefiting from this shift and which groups are harmed from this shift. So let's dive right now and look at Industry 4.0 and COVID. So we look at Industry 4.0, and I first want to start with a definition. So we see here there's a variety of different areas of Industry 4.0. And I'll start with the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is a relatively familiar term that we've got, which really relates to interconnectivity. We've got a variety of different devices, products, services that are all now connected in a way that we never were connected before. Moving on, this Internet of Things, as well as the collection of data and the digitization of data, we've got big data. Now, big data is an entity where we have massive amounts of data that are available to us to analyze in ways that we never could have before. There's a variety of different reasons why we're able to do that now, because the data existed before, but it didn't exist in the computers that we had. Computing power has become a lot cheaper over time, as well as computing power has become a lot more effective, efficient, and powerful. So we've got a variety of different converging trends there, which have enabled big data, which underpins artificial intelligence. Systems integration relates to the connection of different systems in ways that we previously couldn't connect it, which is specifically enabled in digital. Augmented reality, a really fascinating area, which I think personally is going to grow significantly in the next 5 to 10 years. Virtual reality, augmented reality. The difference is that virtual reality is when you live in a completely virtual world. We might often recognize this from wearing a headset where you're completely immersed in that virtual world. Augmented reality is where you actually see your physical world, but it's augmented with a variety of different images, information, and the like relevant to that world. With COVID and the disruption that we've seen in moving people to work from home, disrupting offices, disrupting businesses, there is a greater need for connectivity and connection in the world. And we're going to see a significant increase in augmented reality in the period coming. Moving around, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, significant area there where we're distributing manufacturing rather than having it in large factories for certain areas. Cybersecurity, number 6, we've never seen a time when it's been more important, and it's likely going to keep being extremely important. Cloud computing, a huge important area. The cloud is responsible for so many things that we're able to do from a remote distributed network. With the increased penetration of internet moving throughout the world and the increased number of people that are able to access internet, the cloud is the engine that's able to support that with the data where people can connect all together. Moving on into the final areas, we see autonomous systems, a hugely important part of a variety of many different industries, and simulation. Simulation is an important area where we're able to run digital simulations where previously we weren't able to because we lacked the computing power, we lacked the data, we lacked the algorithms, and now we're able to get a huge amount of information that we previously couldn't. So putting all these different entities of Industry 4.0 together, what do we actually see? What is happening in this area? And it's the following. The service sector disruption has been accelerated in COVID, and the service sector has been unequally affected by the disruption that has occurred by Industry 4.0 superimposed by COVID. The service sector has been unequally affected by the disruption that we've seen caused by already Industry 4.0, which was moving along and then accelerated by COVID. And I want to explore now with you what this actually means for the service sector and this unequal impact that COVID has had on the service sector. So let's dive in first and actually look at, well, how do we define the service sector? And the service sector is a very large sector. So when we talk generally about it, we lose a lot of value. But I want to distill down to the way we're going to be talking about it today, which is health services, education services, financial, tourism, hospitality services, professional services, transport, digital systems. These are all components of the service sector. So to give a talk like this about innovation and productivity impacting on the service sector, well, it's actually quite difficult to do that because we generalize and we lose a lot of granularity. But what we can say very, very accurately is that the service sector has been unequally impacted. Now let's unpack that a little bit and see which parts of the service sector have been more impacted and which parts have actually benefited. So when we look at this unequal impact of COVID and Industry 4.0 on the service sector, we might think about the most obvious examples. Transportation using aeroplanes has been impacted immensely. The closure of international and state borders has halted aeroplanes and their service. With that, we've seen significant changes in shareholder value for airlines. United Airlines, one of the largest airlines in the United States, we see here, and you can see from February, pre-COVID, all the way to now, there's been a significant destruction of shareholder value. Carnival Corporation, the cruise line company. Carnival, similarly, hugely impacted. And if we think about cruise ships, they were one of the areas where there were significant amounts of COVID infection in the earlier stages of COVID, where we had outbreaks on cruises and people traveling around where they were connecting between different ports in the world and spreading COVID. This part of the service sector has been hugely, hugely impacted by COVID. People are not moving, people are not traveling, and the transportation sector has been hugely impacted, as well as the tourism sector. Now, it's not just airplanes and it's not just cruises. If we look at Hertz here, we see that Hertz, one of the largest car rental companies in the United States, filed for bankruptcy as the coronavirus pandemic crushes the car rental industry. If you travel to a new location and you don't have a car there, we know that most of the car rental locations are actually based at the airport for travelers. And if people aren't traveling to the airport, then they're not renting cars. And Hertz has been one of the victims of this scenario. However, it's not all bad news for everyone. COVID is an absolutely immense tragedy for the whole world. And in this crisis, there have been some people that have actually benefited from it from a business perspective. So when we look at home shopping, online shopping, Amazon comes to mind. There has been a huge growth in online shopping and online retail expenditure. Now, younger generations are familiar with online shopping, but the closure of retail shops, the restrictions that have been put in place to try and minimize contact and spread of COVID have meant that older people who would normally prioritize retail have moved online and started shopping online. We see the Amazon share price has done the opposite of United and Carnival, where it started at a lower base. It's still an exponential trajectory and it's been phenomenal, Amazon's growth. But during COVID, we can see it's risen over 50%. Zoom, Netflix, technologies that come into people's houses where people can access them have also grown. Netflix, this wonderful story of the disruption of Blockbuster, we see here has made a significant growth on an already growing shareholder price and shareholder value return. We can see here in this graph that Netflix has hugely benefited within COVID, where you also see significant amounts of growth in the 50% area. There are winners and there are losers in the service sector. And it very much relates to your positioning in the market. It relates to government, regulations, restrictions, the prevention of movement of people, and it relates to digitization. And do you rely on physical connection and physical touch to deliver your service, or do you not? So I'd now like to explore a bit further about this area and see some trends in the service sector that we've actually been observing over the past decades specifically focused on Asia, but we'll also see with the world. So we see in this graph, this is the sector share of gross domestic product by country from 1990 to 2016. And you see in developing Asia, the service sector, which is the bar chart, the third one, we see it was 45% of the economies in 1990, and it was 54% in 2016. We see this significant trend across all of these different regions, Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, the OECD. There is increase of people moving into the service sector over time. Furthermore, we see in this graph productivity in services against per capita income. And we can see that productivity is higher in areas where people are paid more. This likely relates to the knowledge component of service work, where more developed, wealthier nations are spending more time in that particular area as a percentage of their overall economy. So we can see that the service sector over the past decades has actually been a significantly growing area in all regions of the world. Knowledge workers in the more wealthier regions and other types of service, as well as knowledge workers in the less wealthy areas. So putting all of this together, we end up in a scenario where the service sector has been more important and more valuable than ever. But yet the service sector is not homogeneous. The different entities are impacted in very, very different ways, as we've seen before, both from Industry 4.0 and then the superimposed impact of COVID. And I'd now like to explore a reason that I think is a framework to consider this impact. Digitization is so important and crucial, and digitization in the service sector has disrupted traditional business models. And this is an interesting framework that I want to share with you. And it's looking at industries by information enablement, which is a viewpoint delivered by exponential organizations. So if we look at industries by information enablement, at the top of this triangle, we see information-only products. The Twitters of the world, the LinkedIns, TikTok, Facebook, we see these companies are delivering mostly information and information-only products. The middle part of this triangle are physical products with information-based revenue streams. Amazon is a service. It is able to deliver products and goods in a service capacity to your home via online shopping. Apple delivers both products to you in the form of computers, iPads, iWatches, but it also delivers many services to you, cloud-based storage. It has the iTunes store. It has the App Store, which is a combination of information-only products as well as physical products. And at the base of this triangle, we see industries where physical products that are information-enabled. And this is things like industry, manufacturing, hotels. We have physical products that are information-enabled. Trucking, for example, and transportation. We need the truck, but we also need the information to be able to send the cargo from and to set destinations. Hotels, they are physical areas where people go and stay. And with that, you need information to make bookings and the like, but they're largely physical products. But what we have seen in Industry 4.0 and accelerated with COVID is that disruption has occurred throughout these different types of products. And we're seeing that the information-only products that offer services are largely winning. We see with Airbnb, the disruption prior to COVID that it had done of the hotel industry, where people were able to now stay in anyone's home that went on the platform. There was significant disruption there. There's disruption in transportation. And the disruption comes not from different methods of transportation, but different ways of manufacturing. And we saw the additive manufacturing that we were doing before, that I mentioned, about 3D printing and distributed manufacturing. Well, that exists, and it means that there's less reliance on transportation. We've seen the significant growth of these information-enabled products, services, the growth of LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Zoom. These information-only products and services are significantly growing, and that has been accelerated by COVID. Now, if we look a bit further and we question about the areas where this disruption has accelerated the most, we could ask the question, why is Industry 4.0 and COVID so disruptive? And I'm going to present to you the following scenarios. The first one is the service sector relies on physical contact to deliver the service. This is a variety of different companies. Airbnb, hotels, hospitality. We need physical contact between humans to deliver the service. The second scenario is digital services gain leverage as the cost per unit of the service decreases with higher quantities. We see this in Zoom. It doesn't cost any more to have one more person join your Zoom call, whereas previously to have a person travel to your meeting would have meant that individual buying a plane ticket, getting a hotel, taxi fares, a significant burden of expense, but joining one more person on a Zoom call doesn't actually add expense to it, and it doesn't cost Zoom more to run it. So scenario 2 are the winners, and scenario 1s are the significant losers who are impacted in COVID. Another way of framing this is as the marginal cost of delivering one more service offering tends to zero, the domain explodes, the problem space shifts, and scarcity shifts to abundance. Previously, like I said, for people to travel to meetings, there was scarcity. There was airplane tickets, they were expensive, you have to travel, taxis, hotels, restaurants. Now we've got an abundant world where anyone can have a meeting easily, and people are culturally embracing that. So we are having this scenario where companies that rely on that physical contact, they are significantly impacted more than others where digitization means that the marginal cost of delivering that service to one additional customer is close to zero. So it's with that in mind that I now want to explore and dive into the service sector. And let's look at insights regarding innovation and productivity in the service sector. The first insight that I want to share is that COVID is here to stay. Don't manage your workforce in phases of work. Manage your workforce on a spectrum of activity. Many governments, jurisdictions, as well as people, we value certainty. We value having plans. We value knowing, particularly in a highly unpredictable, uncertain world, what is going to happen. So with this, you see a variety of different plans around staged return to work, staged return to open society, staged return to connection, where people are able to go to the shops, go to the soccer, go to the football. We all want that. However, COVID doesn't act like that. It acts in a much less predictable way where we actually need to move on a spectrum. So what this means is the following. This is from a McKinsey article where they reference return as a new muscle, not just a plan. And they say return is not a phase, it's a way of operating, a nerve center that can help build the capabilities that business need in the next normal. Now, where I live in Western Australia, Australia has closed its borders to travel, as well as my state, well, the largest state in Australia, has also closed its borders to travel. We're in a situation where we currently don't have active COVID spreading in the community because of these significant border closures. And with that, there is a staged return to work, return to society, return to socialization that I'm showing you here, where you can see phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, phase 6. But I live in one of the most remote areas of the world, and we have certain inherent characteristics that are supportive of this approach. But what we're seeing in most areas is actually this linear way of thinking is not appropriate. What we're seeing here is these set stages and phasing is actually not what's happening. And we're seeing something quite different. And I would suggest that when you consider managing your workforce, having these set arbitrary phases is not the approach to take. And what the approach to take that I think is really, really important and valuable is to consider it in the following way. And that is on a spectrum. We see here different parts of the spectrum rather than the different phases. And on the spectrum, we have here very open, almost thinking about COVID under complete control or no COVID circulating in the community and how you would manage your workforce. And here we have very closed. This is where we have significant lockdown restrictions. And as a company managing your employees, your contractors, your workforce, you need to have systems and infrastructure set up to be able to move across these areas rapidly and fluently. So rather than thinking about this in a staged approach where we move there, we actually want to think about this oscillation. Now, with that and building on it, we see the following. The second insight that I want to share is consider your business in the framework COVID-19 restrictions, business cycle effects, and structural changes. This was published just today from McKinsey, and I think it's an interesting framework to consider COVID in. And let's explore it a little bit now. We see here COVID-19 restrictions, business cycle effects, and structural changes. There are forces within these. COVID-19 restrictions aren't in our control, largely. They're controlled by governments, they're controlled by legislation, regulators, and the like, and those restrictions get imposed upon us. With that, we have a consequence, and we see that consequence in business cycle effects. People spend generally less money. Exports reduce. Business health becomes challenging. And with that, you see ongoing structural shifts in your economy and your society. So we see in examples here in the COVID-19 restrictions. The first example is net migration changes, including international students. The education service sector is one that has absolutely been unequally affected in of itself. Digital online education significantly increased. Universities, which apply a traditional model of teaching in person, have been significantly disrupted. It's been compounded by the closure of international borders, where international students would ordinarily travel to participate in university. Furthermore, we see a variety of different business cycle effects. People with their wages becoming unemployed, it's affecting the way that they spend, structural changes, an overall shift to online. It's important to consider your business and how it sits within these different parts of the framework. Now, no doubt you've been doing that, considering it all along. I think this framework is particularly useful to consider it in a structured way from where we are now, and then you can scenario plan and scenario test from there. Moving forward, the next insight I want to share as an answer, but first as a question. And I'm going to ask the question, what process are we using to develop and test new services? And the answer in my mind is low-cost, rapid, iterative cycles. Low-cost, rapid, and iterative cycles of testing new services. Now, what we're seeing is customer behavior is significantly changing. It's changing in ways, some of which are predictable, some of which are less predictable. It's changing in response to human needs, of what people want, how they want to engage, what products they're going to spend, of the belief we should save more to save for the future that might be more bleak. There's a variety of different things happening. And in the service sector, it's important to engage and test and prototype and do it in as low cost a way as possible in rapid cycles so you can change the way that you are engaging with your customers. One such way which taken uptake is with makeup and the industry of makeup. where we've seen people have not been able to go into buy products and test them on because of the closure of shopping centres and retail. So the service around online shopping has grown, but it raises the question of, well, what shade and what product do I want? And companies like L'Oreal are making digital products that are actually able to AI generate and augment on your face what the makeup will look like. These are areas that companies are doing from a service offering to try and increase the number of online sales to sell their physical products. We're seeing this, and I would ask you to consider the following. When we look at service sector and we look at service models, the entire process of creating certain services deals with concepts rather than physical objects. What that means is you have to interact with humans, you have to interact with human behavior, and we don't necessarily know how that's going to be. It means that market testing and other types of market research on the new service can be challenging. Customers must be enticed into experiencing the service, and this often requires high marketing efforts. Innovation and agile are two very overused words, but at the essence of what they mean, agile is about iteration in response to customers. And it's able to get real world data, because everything works really nice on a PowerPoint slide and in a document. But it's in the real world that when you interact with the customer and you focus on the service, that's where you get the richest data. Moving on. Our next insight is to aggressively seek to understand that evolving customer behavior. The point that I was raising before is so important, and I want to dive into it specifically here. And I want you to consider and reflect on the following. I want you to think about your business and work out positions to optimize customer and stakeholder incentives and value in your ecosystem. It's alignment in COVID about different customer and stakeholder value and where they position in the system, and certain things that they have that are incentivized that may exist in COVID where it previously did not, allowing the new creation and capture of value. And I want to give a specific example that is close to my professional area, which is in healthcare. And specifically, what I want to reference is telehealth. So if we look at telehealth, we question, well, what did you need to deliver telehealth? You need healthcare services, you need clinics, you need people in the home, you need equipment and infrastructure. All of those products existed to offer the service of telehealth prior to COVID. We had healthcare workers, we had clinics, we had phones, we had FaceTime, we had Skype, we had WhatsApp. So why didn't telehealth take off as much as it did in COVID? Now, the predictable objections that people gave about telehealth prior to COVID was, we can't do telehealth. Patients want connection. Patients don't want to talk on a phone. They want to meet face to face. Well, some of that might be true, but we're generalizing a lot. Patients, well, patients can be younger people who are more digital familiar, and patients can be older people who are more digital naive. So we generalize, but it's easy to buy into those objections. What happened in COVID was we had stakeholder alignment of incentives. We had the healthcare worker who, if you didn't have to be exposed to COVID and meet with people, you didn't want to be. We had patients who also didn't want to get sick. We had managers of healthcare systems who wanted their system to run, and with the biggest way of mitigating the risk of their workers and patients getting and spreading COVID. So in COVID, stakeholders' incentives aligned. No one wanted to get COVID, patients still wanted healthcare and workers to be paid, and welcome telehealth. Suddenly, where it's in my individual incentive to use it, I'm open to it. And the objections reduce. And we see this in a variety of different areas, where the optimization matrix, the incentive matrix has shifted. Customers, employees, workers, we see this architecture looks different. And there's ways to create and extract value in this new world where what people are optimizing for has changed. Now, I want to dive a bit deeper into this. And it's about focusing on customers. And I want to pick up a point that I said before about the objections around patients using telehealth, is that patients don't want it or patients want connection. It's always easy to talk about they don't want this, they don't want that. But who is they? And a lot of data and a lot of rich information and insight gets lost in averages. So customers are everything, but we often average out information, and averages are misleading. Averages are misleading. So what you need to do is de-average data and segment customers to understand them, to grow your business and develop new and better services. Healthcare, as I said, is a great example of this, where telehealth is actually really great for certain people. They can stay home, they can make a phone call. If you're able to use your phone, if you have a phone, it's a really, really great use and you might like it, particularly if you're younger. But we need to de-average it. We need to get down to, well, it's people probably that have less serious concerns that actually would be fine having a telehealth consult. Older people likely still value the face-to-face, but there's certain things that convenience may actually trump it. If you're a busy working person and you don't have much time, a telehealth consult fit into your schedule would be quite beneficial. If you've got a lot of time, you actually might like the experience of going to the doctor and seeing your usual doctor. We only get the insight when we de-average the information into segments. Another area that I think is really, really interesting is a lot of the discussions about working from home and working virtually where that is able in your industry. Now, some people say, you know what? Working from home is wonderful. I love it. It's absolutely amazing. Other people say that, well, working from home is terrible. I'm not enjoying it. I miss the social connection. And you end up with these platitudes and these averages where people say working from home isn't as effective. But you actually need to segment it out. So people that have families and their kids don't have childcare or going to school, working from home becomes significantly harder than people that aren't in that situation. So if we segment it out, we actually might find nuances where, depending on your family and your living demographic, you actually have different preferences. The other one is younger people who are entering the workforce, and specifically for knowledge workers, joining a new job, coming out of training, university. Well, there's actually a significant part of social elements there that you might really value from being in the office. There's other parts of ways to segment this as well, though. One of them is there's certain meetings and sharing of ideas and brainstorming that is more effective in person, but there's a variety of administrative tasks that actually it doesn't matter if I'm in the office doing the admin tasks, and I actually get more time to focus. So there is huge, huge richness in being able to de-average and break down into customer segments and worker employee segments and get those insights. Now, I want to share with this a really interesting example, and it builds on the following insight, is that service excellence can be defined as what a business chooses to do well and what it chooses not to do well. Know which part of the service is crucial for your customer. I think a really, really interesting service sector industry to share is entertainment, and entertainment through sport. Because you actually really need to know, well, what's important in sport? And I want to share the example of rugby in Australia. I'm going to share the example of rugby. And we go, well, what's important in sport? We can't have people attending the stadiums because of COVID, so we have to play a rugby game and we want to televise it. But is that what's important? Is it just the pure broadcast of the sport? Or are there other important parts in the user experience? So I'm going to show you a video of rugby in Australia, and I'm going to show you and commentate and share what it was like pre-COVID when there were stadiums full of fans, and then when they first played it without any fans, and recognized that the customer experience of watching the sport without any fans cheering is actually not very good. And then what they did to remedy this. So let's dive into this. This is rugby in Australia, full stadiums. We can hear the fan base roaring and cheering pre-COVID. What they did with no fans.
Walker and Mitchell, lovely touch on for Graham.
Empty stadiums,
he's claiming it
no
as
fans cheering. It looks different.
He gets a belt on the arm. No,
there's not the cheering for the try.
Campbell Graham over the goal line.
It feels very,
Toller
very
wrapped him up in the
different.
tackle. Still 2 plays left on the set. As Croft floats one for Staggs, who gets away from Burns.
It's
and
rather
scores
empty
the first
and I'm
try.
much less engaged. So they put faith with fans. We saw a different take on this of football in Denmark, where fans were able to watch the Danish sport from Zoom screens put all around the stadium. It's different ways of approaching sport. The entertainment industry is very much a service. People are enjoying it. Sport, people enjoy watching it. And yet you can see the difference there. It's not actually just about watching the sport. It's watching the sport and having your customers feel engaged. And the Australian Rugby League, what they did with this was develop a simulation that had a variety of different sounds that all need to be really, really well timed. You need cheering at an appropriate time of cheering. You can't have sounds that don't match the play. But they thought about the customer and the experience. They were able to come up with a novel, innovative solution to increase engagement in their area. The final insight that I want to talk about is to go digital as fast as you can. If you're not a digital company, you really need to offer exceptional customer experience and satisfaction. And ideally, you offer both. Now, going digital as fast as you can is for both customers, but it's also for your workers, and it's also to reduce cost. And we focused a lot on customer, so I want to share a particular way of going digital in a company that can actually reduce significant cost. And that is using intelligent automation. Intelligent automation is a software program which can automate clerical tasks using screen scraping, keyboard and mouse automation. It's not smart, it's not artificial intelligence, it doesn't learn, it simply automates commands. It automates, move the mouse, copy this area in Excel, paste it over here. It can automate that process with the computer doing it when you give it the rules of engagement. Now, with this, you have significant savings in intelligent automation. It can save significant time. I think many of us would have been there manually doing intensive clerical tasks, and about 15 minutes of human work can be done in seconds by the software robot. So let's have a look at an example of this. We're going to shortly see, in this example, a robot that's been tasked to copy information from email and then move it to a new folder. We're then going to take that information and we want to populate it in Excel. And we're going to shortly see the computer software doing that automatically based on the rules here. The robot and the software, using those words interchangeably here, can log into your software system, log in, and we want to generate an invoice using the information we had Excel and put it there and automatically populate it and now email it to the person who is supposed to be receiving the invoice. Now, we see this is an element of lowering cost, and many different service sector organizations, for the larger ones that rely on having a digital infrastructure, there's ways of trying to reduce cost. Now, an unfortunate consequence of that is the displacement of labor. And what we're really seeking to do is capture the most value for the customer in a way that is viable. But in a COVID world, with Industry 4.0 accelerating as well, we're seeing the significant focus on cost as companies come in to try and stay sustainable. So through these insights and these examples that I've shared, we've explored what's happened regarding Industry 4.0 pre-COVID, specifically what Industry 4.0 is, and the digitization of services, and the ones that have a marginal cost nearing zero are the ones that have significantly benefited in a COVID world that are able to operate digitally. We've shared a variety of different insights, and I think as a parting thought. Jeff Bezos, the founder, CEO of Amazon, richest man in the world, it's interesting, this comment, be stubborn on your vision, but flexible on the details. COVID requires significant flexibility, not only in the way that we operate businesses, but the way that we engage with our fellow humans. It's a massive crisis, significant tragedy. Leadership needs to be authentic, vulnerable, and sincere. And we need flexibility on the details to manage that. So I'm going to ask Junho to come back and we'll have a discussion. If there's been any questions in the audience, we can take some of those too.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Carlo, for sharing your insight on my three key issues. So especially for the how we can approach innovation to increase productivity in the service sector. You introduced about Industry 4.0, advanced technologies, how we can adapt, how we can follow up these technologies. And also the keyword is the digitalization to cope with this pandemic. So we have some questions from the viewers. This is from Maria. The COVID-19 pandemic is forcing industries, all industries, to go for digitalization. Do you have any comment or any advice for companies or organizations which are having many difficulties this period, coping with the changing technologies? Any advice can you give us?
My advice is the following. Just as Maria says, it is hugely important to shift where possible into digital. And for traditional service sectors that are less familiar with digital, for example, healthcare, there's huge amounts of value for digital to occur in healthcare. But yet, most of the leaders and management and executives are relatively naive in those areas. And we see in a lot of different industries now people grappling and struggling to understand how to actually shift their companies into digital. The way that I would share and the way to think about this is in two ways. The first part is to say for large companies and medium-sized companies, there's really two types of digital transformation. There is large-scale digital transformation and there is non-large scale. So we see large-scale digital transformation is implementing significant software programs across the organization. Small-scale digital information is much more simpler software that people can get value from. The core challenge and the predictable problem that people have is when they implement technology is they don't do it with their employees and customers in mind. They have set assumptions, set ideas about the way people will interact with the digital tool. They make those plans, business plans, set assumptions that they don't even know, and then they go to execute them. And you learn very early on that actually you're going to be building the wrong product that isn't providing the value that people want or need. So my biggest urging there is really clarify what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Clarify what that problem is you're trying to solve. It may be a digital solution, it may not be a digital solution, but keep the customer and your worker at center view so you can make sure that you add value to them and not just digitize for the sake of digitization.
Thank you. So before we chase the new technology, we need to analyze, we need to clarify current situation. And then based on our current analysis, we can develop more or we can adapt more technologies. Thank you. And also we have one question from the Sri Bintang. Is there any innovation for hospitality business? For example, hotel and traveling in numerous area, as well as safe, healthy for public. These hospitality areas is affected so much in this pandemic period. Any advice can you give us?
They're massively affected, and my heart goes out to friends, family, people that have been hugely affected locally and around the world. It's incredibly sad to see that. My sense of hospitality is that the innovations that are actually going to enable the opening up of hospitality are likely not going to come from the hospitality sector per se. They're more likely to come from other areas. And what I mean by that is the following. Within the hospitality sector, we've seen restaurants move to online. We've seen an increased amount of delivery of food where you have people not going into the establishment to minimize the risk of spread of COVID. But we also don't have rapid point of care COVID testing at the moment. We don't have that available around the world where you can do a simple saliva test and get the results very, very shortly after. So if we were actually able to have quick, cheap, available point of care testing, we actually might be able to open up restaurants, hospitality, hotels in a way that we previously couldn't. The other part that I think is interesting is there'll be areas, and Australia has implemented a quarantine period for 14 days, anyone entering the country. It's a significant burden. If we can reduce that amount and try and make travel as safe as possible, which I think is going to come from healthcare biotech innovations, then that's really where I see the return to a functioning as normal as possible society where the hospitality sector can benefit and try and return to what it was.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to innovate the service sector for the small companies, we can develop new service business, or we can change our service. How they can survive, how they can sustain, how they can improve their productivity for the small companies. They don't have enough budget to adopt new technologies. Any advice for them, please?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because larger companies with significant cash and smaller companies without significant cash, you need to manage this differently. The part that I think is particularly important to note, and I'm going to build on an area that I spoke about, the customer needs to be at the center of decision making. The laser focus on the customer. One of my businesses that I'm involved in is a online education business in the healthcare area. We teach people to be health coaches. And with that, it was in this period we needed to focus purely on our customer. Who are our core customers? What will absolutely be of key value to them? And then we need to allocate our resources that we've got to support our customer base in the most efficient way. And I think it's simple to say, it's hard to do, but having that ongoing dialogue with your customer group is crucial. The second part is for services where you're continually trying to adapt and iterate. You want that real-time data. You want customers to give you information, and you want to test in the most low-cost, rapid way and see what customers buy and see what customers don't buy. See where they increase their spend, see where they don't increase their spend. What are the other areas that your resources can actually focus on? Everything at the customer at the center. And I think that budget constraints force that. Whereas when there's a bit more budget around, it's a bit easier and a bit more comfortable. So it's really diving into the innovation and productivity with the customer at the center, opening up that dialogue, getting real-time data, and experimenting with new services, amended services in the lowest cost, fast way possible.
Thank you. Customer is the answer. Customer satisfaction in this pandemic period. Thank you. So for the government side, in this the Industry 4.0, to cope with these challenging technologies, especially the technology for the Industry 4.0, how government policymakers develop strategic plan to improve national productivity in the service sector? Can you share some opinions or some ideas?
Yeah, I can share some ideas. It's an incredibly difficult decision to make as a government policymaker, as a policymaker generally. We have these trade-offs between opening and having an open society and having a more closed society, less open. And with that, they come with different trade-offs, they come with different costs. And it's not just economic cost, it's human cost. So we see in more open areas, a higher rate of COVID results in more deaths. We can measure that. We can measure the number of deaths. We can measure the number of people that have COVID. We can't measure the harm of COVID. We also can't measure the harm of lockdowns and restrictions. So people losing their jobs happens down track. It's harder to do. People having significant mental health challenges is harder to do. And living in society, we actually have these trade-offs all the time. Speed limits in cars are a good example of this, where in Australia, for example, the speed limit is about 60 kilometers an hour on most roads. Why isn't it 260? Well, it's because we say we don't want that number because we think that people will likely die and be injured in a way that we don't accept as a society. But we also don't choose 5 kilometers per hour driving on the roads, because 5 kilometers per hour would mean that you couldn't get anywhere in any convenient time. But you'd also have no significant injuries likely, or deaths, or minimal number. So we have these trade-offs all the time, and I think it's an incredibly difficult decision for policymakers. At the heart of the issue is using the best available data, recognizing there's going to be an absence of necessary data to make the decisions. Furthermore, it's supporting the service sector in ways either funding and trying to keep people alive and have enough income to go through this period, subsidies, and also investments in technology as well as infrastructure in the local areas that support service sector businesses operating.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing the insights. So this is another question from the Angela from Philippines. One of the most affected service sector in the Philippines is the tourism. I think it's not only Philippines, but all over the world, I think. So for the tourism industry, any advice on SMEs in this industry to innovate and to improve productivity for the tourism industry?
I think it's incredibly challenging in the tourism sector, particularly in countries that are net importers of tourism, countries that rely on international visitors coming and spending money, which I assume the Philippines would be like that more than their domestic tourism. Incredibly challenging. The biggest things that I can say with that is, one, what's the opportunity for domestic delivery of your service? Two, what is the adaptation possibilities of what you do to be translated and delivered in a service market aligned with customer needs that are changing in your local community? I know that's a high-level answer. It's difficult to answer this without focusing on the specifics. But some examples that we've seen, ships being repurposed as hospitals, or ships being repurposed as transportation of cargo and the like, where usually they would be looking at tourism. So it's a really hard question with a really disappointing answer, because the biggest answer to it is just to try and open up as quickly as possible, which, well, I said, goes back to trying to get this under control, have a vaccine developed, as well as point of care, rapid, cheap, accessible testing.
Okay, thank you. We can get some idea from your insight. So another question is from the Muhammad Ahmad Mia. So digitalization and automation is difficult and different in most of the SMEs industries. What innovation is suitable for the SMEs industries?
I think the innovation that's most suitable, as a general answer, is anything that makes increased value for your customer. And increased value can be, you have increased spend from your customer because their problem is solved. You have higher retention of your customer and a higher likelihood of repeat. That, I think, is crucial in the service sector. And I know that innovation there might be a very broad category. It doesn't necessarily have to be digital. It doesn't necessarily have to be tech. But innovation is the continual improvement of service offering. The other part is the innovation, which in SMEs is about efficiency of delivering the service. And how can we actually more efficiently, with greater value, deliver the service from the supplier perspective?
Thank you. So I think this COVID-19 pandemic, this is crisis, we can say, but we can convert to the opportunity. How we can make it opportunity this pandemic period? Do you have any insight for this?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to look at this. So in terms of opportunity, there is a business sense, and we're talking about productivity as part of the Asian Productivity Organization. There's ways to consider, and what can we do? How do we respond? And the urgency and the threat is likely never higher than before in recent times. So the urgency really drives, I think, the innovation. I think there's another higher level element to that as well, which is making decisions and asking questions to ourselves about what do we want in our lives and what's important to us, and making decisions around there. Now, it's difficult to question that. For some people, it's going to be survival and getting through, where they've lost employment and there's challenges there. There's other people where they're going to have to make significant decisions for themselves and their family. And I think one of the significant opportunities that is forced, as you say, Junho, through the tragedy and the crisis of COVID, is to try and get clarity with where you're at, what's important to you, the people around you, your local community, and then how can we best support each other through this crisis.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is all the questions from our viewers. Viewers, if you have any further questions, please send us your question to the APO. We will feedback to you. And Dr. Carlo, thank you very much. And do you have any final message to improve service sector productivity continuously?
My final message is, in whatever way you're involved in the service sector will be different. SME, larger organizations, business owner, employee. I would urge you in your role to consider, one, how can I make a positive impact for the customer? Two, how can I make a positive impact to my co-workers and the organization? Three, what are the areas I need to learn about to make this difference? I might need to upskill in areas around digital, around innovation, technology. And my final point is to stay connected, reach out to people. I think in this time of hardship, in this time of challenge, no matter what industry we're in, we're all humans seeking certainty, needs, and support your co-workers, support your family in whatever way that you can, authentically and with generosity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Carlo Bellini. So productivity movement is the journey for continuous improvement and innovation for our business. So I hope you'll get some insight on how to innovate service sector and what kind of the technologies we have in this Industry 4.0 period, and also about how to overcome this crisis and improve service sector productivity. We had the difficulties every 10 years. So this time also, we can overcome this pandemic situation. So productivity motto is, we will try our best to be better than before, better than yesterday. So in this innovation session, I hope you can get the ideas and the insight and try your best to overcome this pandemic and improve your productivity in service sector. Thank you very much for joining APO Talk. Thank you very much.